the developers themselves say there's a significant chance that our technology will cause human extinction. Where is that risk now? Well, if you ask the developers of the technology, it's between 10 and 50%. So we need the systems to be about 10 million times safer than the developers say that the systems are. So I think there's really two different paths that could unfold. One path is that the present technology turns out not to scale and not to lead to superintelligent machines. And quite probably that would lead to the bubble bursting, enormous financial losses, possibly a global recession. But it would give us more time, I think, to work on safety and perhaps to choose a different technology direction. The other possibility is that further advances do take place fairly soon. So perhaps by the end of this decade, we would see the kind of AI system that really does present a risk to human control.
What do you think that risk is?
So I think my gut feel is about a 25% chance that these further technological breakthroughs will happen. I mean, there's enormous resources being poured into this. The companies know, I think, that they need more ideas, that what they have now probably isn't going to get them there. If that happens, we will find that the AI systems are behaving in ways that we don't like, but they'll probably be very, very well integrated into our economy at that point. So it's very unlikely that we'll actually be able to turn them all off. Even if we want to, they're also going to take steps to prevent that from happening. And if we get to the point where the AI systems are able to actually do their own AI research, and by that I don't mean just speeding up the rate of experimentation and trying different architectural configurations, but I really mean coming up with new conceptual breakthroughs. Then we probably will have AI systems that will understand particularly physics in ways that we don't. And if you ask the chimpanzees and the gorillas, how did humans take control, right? How is it that humans can talk to each other from the other side of the planet, that they can, by pressing a button, wipe out 1,000 square miles of forest? They haven't the faintest idea. And that will be the most dangerous situation, is that the AI systems are acting in ways that we simply don't understand at all. That they're just bringing about change in the physical world that we can't predict. So asking humans to describe how superintelligent AI systems will take control is sort of like asking chimpanzees, how will humans take control? We may not have the answer.
And some people think there's a risk of human extinction. Do you think that's credible?
Well, it's certainly at the point that I'm describing, we would have no say in whether we continue to exist. And depending on exactly what objectives the AI systems are pursuing, and particularly if they see humanity as a threat to their continued existence and their control over the world, then they might well decide that they're better off if we're not here.
So what's the solution, do you think, Stuart?
So I think the solution is really twofold. One is a technical solution, developing ways of designing AI systems that are guaranteed to be safe and beneficial for humans. And the second is a governance solution, meaning making sure that only safe and beneficial AI systems are developed and preventing even bad actors from developing and deploying other kinds of AI systems that present this risk.
So this kind of multilateral effort, do you have confidence in this?
Well, I think eventually governments will understand that this is a matter of self-preservation for humanity.
Do you think that point will come soon enough?
Hard to say, but that's why we're here, right? It's I think all one can do is do one's best to convince people that this risk is real. I think there's a natural psychological reluctance to accept that, the entire world, at least the advanced economies, are engaged in a race that is leading directly towards the edge of a cliff. So people want to be able to sleep at night. They will hang on to any argument they can use to say, oh, well, we don't need to worry about that. And we just have to keep saying, no, those arguments are false. The reasons why AI systems present an existential risk are clear and obvious, and the AI research community and the leaders of the tech industry are actually pretty unanimous on this. This is not a fringe view, it's not a sci-fi hypothetical. It is the mainstream view of people who understand and build the technology.
So, a lot of people think this is basically down to China and the US, because these are the big players. What role can the EU play and other countries besides China and the US?
First of all, the US versus China narrative, I think, is a little bit misconstrued, and to some extent based on a false premise. So the argument of the present administration in the US is that the desired goal is US domination of the world through AI, and that if the US allows any form of regulation or takes into account any safety consideration, then China will dominate the world through Chinese AI. And implicit in that is the claim that China doesn't regulate AI, but in fact, China regulates AI maybe even more strictly than the European Union. And its leadership has talked explicitly about the need to consider the existential risk of AI, and they're proposing a global platform for coordinating AI governance. So, there's always an issue: should we take this at face value, or perhaps, is there some hidden agenda? And that's something above my pay grade. But I think, it's reasonable to sit down and talk about it and see what agreements can be reached.
I guess this would be the first step, no? Bringing everyone round a table.
Yeah, and we've been doing that. There's a process called the International Dialogues on AI Safety, which started in October of 23. And we're having our 5th meeting in April in London. And I think it's actually gone very well. So it's essentially scientist to scientist, so Western scientists and Chinese scientists meeting to just talk about the problem and talk about what could be done. And the concept of red lines for governing AI systems came out of that sequence of meetings, and it's I think gained a lot of traction, at least on the Chinese side, among senior government officials as well as scientists. So as for the rest of the world, I think the European Union passed its AI Act. It has some, maybe bureaucratic overreach in there, but it's not actually regulating things very strictly. So there's a lot about disclosure, about taking appropriate steps and documenting things. But as far as I know, there's nothing in the Act that says, if your system fails such and such a test, then you may not deploy it, you don't have access to the market. So it's not really a certification regime the way that we have for airplanes and nuclear power stations and so on. So I think a lot of the noise being generated saying, oh, it's stifling innovation and it's going to set Europe back and so on, is generated by industry. Industry doesn't like regulation. What we've learned over the years is there's a public-facing voice that says, oh yeah, we welcome regulation, we're concerned about safety and so on, but the lobbying process has been relentless to eviscerate the EU AI Act, to ensure deregulation in the United States, in fact even preventing the states from doing their own regulation. So I think what the middle powers can do is, the collective market of the middle powers is bigger than either the US or China. And so I think it would be very difficult for the tech companies to just say, okay, well, we're pulling out of the rest of the world, right? I mean, they're already blocked from operating in China and vice versa. The Chinese companies are not really able to operate in the US. So if you block these companies from the rest of the world, then their revenue streams will shrink drastically and they won't be able to repay the $3 trillion that they're borrowing to build all their data centers and so on. So I think there is a lot of leverage. But that leverage can only be applied if the middle powers, we'll call them, pull in the same direction, and they're not trying to gain advantage over each other. I think there's a lot of discussion and negotiation that has to happen for this strategy to actually work. The interests of, for example, the European Union and India and Japan are, on the face of it, initially quite different.
Do you think we should pause the development of AI?
So I think the way I would prefer to describe it is we should require that AI systems are safe. And if developers are unable to build safe AI systems, then that requirement would turn into a pause because they wouldn't be able to deploy more AI systems until they figure out how to make them safe. And I think that's maybe the right way to think about it. And it might be that they're never able to provide the necessary safety assurances. I think particularly for technology that it's where the developers themselves say there's a significant chance that our technology will cause human extinction, then what we, the human race, would consider an acceptable risk, right, for extinction might be 1 in 100 million per year collectively across all AI systems, or maybe 1 in a billion per year.
So what is that risk now, do you think?
Where is that risk now? Well, if you ask the developers of the technology, it's between 10 and 50%. So we need the systems to be about 10 million times safer than the developers say that the systems are. And it may just be the case that they cannot reduce the risk to that level, given the technology path that they've chosen, which is giant black boxes that we don't understand.
If you were in charge, if you were the boss, what would be the next step towards what you would consider safety?
So I think there are a bunch of steps. Ultimately, you need a licensing regime, which means you have to get a license in order to access the market, deploy your system. And to get a license, you have to meet certain criteria, right? To get to that stage, you need a registration process, right? So the regulator needs to know that your AI system exists. I think it would be a good idea if the regulator were also able to turn off systems that are violating the rules about how AI systems should behave. So AI systems should automatically register themselves in every copy. So whether it's open source or closed source, every copy of every system should automatically self-register. It has to be accessible to the regulator's off switch in case it's going wrong. And then the criteria for gaining a license would be, okay, here are the possible risks that this system might impose. Here are the levels that we are willing to accept for those risks. Show us that your system meets that level. And if it doesn't, come back when it does.
Are you optimistic?
I am, yes. Perhaps that's just a defect that I suffer from. But I think without some optimism, it's very hard to do the work that you need to do. But I have to believe, and I look back at, for example, what happened with CFCs and the ozone layer. Right? Once people actually understood that the destruction of the ozone layer was happening, and that when it was gone, the Earth would be uninhabitable, then they took action. So it's a matter of convincing them that this is happening, and all the signs are exactly the signs that we would see if it was happening. So I don't know what other, what else would they like to have happen before they're willing to say, okay, yeah, things don't look like they're going in the right direction, and we need to take steps to stop it.